Hello there, and thank you very much for joining us today in this new Azure Portal how-to video. Today, we'll learn how to create a function app, and we have Byron Tardy for that, who is going to show us all about that. So thank you very much for joining us, Byron.
Thank you, Leon. Hello, everybody at home. And what we're going to do is we're going to start here from the Azure homepage, which you can see there's a very prominent create resource, and that's where you're going to go for creating any type of resource. In this case, we're going to create a function app, and it's right here. And what this is going to do is going to load the new full screen create experience. This is similar to what you do with a web app or a storage account, so it should be very familiar. You start by selecting the resource group where you want this resource to be. In this case, I have a functions resource group that I want to use. Then I'm going to name my function. If I give it a name that is already taken, you can see that validation is happening on the fly, which makes it very easy to know what you need to correct. In this case, I'm just going to give it a unique name, and I should be good. The next option is, what are you going to be publishing to your function app? Basically, are you going to be writing this as a piece of code, or are you going to be wrapping it in a container? Azure Functions supports both Docker containers as well as publishing code, so it's really up to you what you want to use. For my demo, I'm going to choose code, because that also lets me show you the fact that we have a runtime stack selection, which basically tells the runtime what is the code that you're going to be writing on. You can do PowerShell, Java, Python, Node.js, or in this case, I'm going to use .NET Core. And we support .NET Core 3.0, by the way. I know people are asking for that. Next would be, what is the region where you want to host this? In this case, I'm just going to go with Central US, because it works for me. Then at this point, I could just go to review and create. And what this will do is it will default you to consumption, which is also the serverless tier. So in this mode, you don't need to configure your scale. Your app will scale automatically depending on the number of requests or the time that it gets triggered. If you want to change that, go into advanced mode, you could click into the hosting tab. And at this point, you can specify more advanced settings for your function. So for example, if you have a specific storage account you want to use, you can select it. If you have a preference over operating system, Linux versus Windows, you can choose that. Usually, depending on the runtime stack that you're selecting, we'll make a recommendation as a default. But if it's supported, you can always switch it around to whatever suits your needs. And then you come to the plan, which is basically the underlying app service plan that is providing the compute for your resources. When you're in consumption, like I said, you're in the serverless mode, which means you don't need to configure the size of the machine or the number of machines. We will adjust that automatically. But if you go to, for example, the new premium plans that we have, this basically lets you have the flexibility of consumption where your app scales dynamically to hundreds of instances. But at the same time, you have the predictability of an app service plan where you know that you can have pre-warmed instances that are always ready to go. So you pay less of a cold start penalty that way. As far as option goes, we have 3 different sizes, which are going to give you different number of CPU resources as well as memory resources. And you need to keep in mind that this is per instance. So this can go to 100 instances, and you can have 14 gigs of memory per instance if you need something like that. The next option would be monitoring. And this is basically representing the App Insights resource that gets created alongside with your Azure function. And this is what we use to monitor functions, so you can see your history of executions, and you can trigger alerts and metrics and stuff like that. You get one of these by default. We recommend people use it. And for most cases, it's going to be free. It's, I think, when you start going high on the data usage because you have a lot of traffic, that you pay per the amount of data that you're publishing to Application Insights. But for that, it needs to be like a pretty high scale app to start hitting that. Next, you go into tags. Tags are what people use to, for example, add additional metadata on their resources. They're also useful if you, for example, have a cost center. You can always tag your resource with the cost center, and the tags are propagated all the way down to your bill. So if you're wondering how much this particular application is costing me that is using several Azure resources, tags is a good way to go. And then finally, we can go all the way to review and create. And this is going to give us a summary of all of the things that will be created. So you can see what subscription you're targeting, you can see that you're creating a new storage account, you're creating a new app service plan, and you're creating a new monitoring resource, in this case, application insights, as part of the creation of your app. And when I click create, we're going to do the validation, which basically checks to make sure that all of your inputs are proper and correct, that there shouldn't be anything that gets in the way of you creating this resource. If there was anything, we would flag it, and then it gives you an opportunity to correct it before you actually execute the create.
Thank you very much, Byron. And thanks every one of you for watching the video. Please leave us a comment on the video, follow us on Twitter, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.